late. There were a few traffic issues, so I think we're ready to get started for now. And you can take a roll call.
Yeah, Jennifer?
Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Mr. Bartlett?
Here.
Mr. Brookhouse?
Yes.
Is that here? He's excused. Mr. Coker?
Here.
Mr. Desot?
Here.
Mr. DeVilliers?
Here.
Mr. Kennedy as a proxy for Dr. Ebar?
Here.
Dr. Fountain?
Here.
Dr. Gore?
Here.
Dr. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Javia is not in attendance.
He's
He's excused.
traffic, and he's just gonna.
Okay. Dr. Joffrion?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Dr. Joseph?
Here.
Ms. Laviolette? Here. Dr. Lewis?
Here.
Dr. Ortling?
Here.
Mr. Powell?
Here.
Mr. Strong?
Barely
Ms. Tanner?
Here.
Mr. Watts?
here.
Mr. Williams?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Well, welcome, everybody. I would like to say that I was hoping to say things have settled down a little bit since the last time we met. That's just not true. So it's good to see you. Thank you for taking the time to come and participate today and be a part of this. We do have a couple of folks just to make sure we all know that we appreciate their attendance, and a couple of our Bessie members, Ms. George Boyer, and also Mr. Ronnie Henderson. Mr. Ronnie Morris. Ronnie Henderson is a student. Ronnie Morris. Thank you guys for being there. Students always picking my mind. So, that being said, we'll move on with our agenda today. Item number 2, the approval of the minutes from our July 31st meeting. Have a motion?
I make a motion.
Motion by Dr. Joffrion, second by Mr. Strong.
Anyone opposed? So,
Seeing none.
motion
Motion
carries.
carries. Item 3, our standing item, consideration of issues regarding our favorite topics, assessment and accountability.
Yeah, consideration of a report regarding accountability results for the 2019-20 school year. We need a motion to receive at this point. Okay. Powell and then DeVilliers. Okay.
All right, Dr. Bromley, it's.
Okay, thanks.
Open to you.
Thank you. So I'll just start off in much the same way that we began our last meeting in telling you how appreciative I am for the work that you're doing, not just as a leader of the system, but appreciating the work that you are assisting your faculty and staff and community in doing, because this is an all hands on deck effort to educate amidst a global health pandemic and hurricanes and everything else that we are dealing with. I have consistently advocated on your behalf, shared with others how impressed I am with the work that is taking place in our school systems. When the conversation was developing regarding will the state move to phase 3, I have been very open in sharing that I feel like our educational community was also ready and prepared to move to phase 3. And when asked, why do you believe that? And it's because I believe that our efforts in phase 2 to prevent the spread of the virus were successful in terms of what we were doing to make that happen. Also, seeing the many ways that our teachers and leaders are growing and innovating and trying to do new things. And God, I've had so many conversations with all of you and other leaders and teachers, and I get the challenges. I mean, I know what they are. I know what they're facing, and I know that we are in a continued struggle. I just want you to know that from the department standpoint, we want to be here to support you and help you. At the same time, recognizing that we have to do everything within our power together to make sure that kids get the education that they deserve. We have to just continue to find a way to do that, and I know the challenges are immense. Regarding this particular item, I'm going to ask Dr. Jim Chesson, Ms. Kathy Noel, Andrew Shackett to make this presentation.
Good morning. I noticed you became very quiet when you heard accountability was about to be talked about. So I want to take you back to March and just provide some background of what has taken place from that point to today. As a reminder, on March 13th, when our schools closed, there was a proclamation that was signed by Governor Edwards at that time that closed all schools statewide. And then on March 20th, the U.S. Department of Education approved Louisiana's waiver request for assessment, accountability, and reporting requirements. And as you know, we had no spring testing due to that waiver. So as a result of all of these actions, along with Bessie Bulletin 111, sections 4501 and 4503 were already in place, which provide a one-year waiver of school and district performance scores and letter grades for any schools that are closed from for disaster reasons for 18 or more consecutive days. So alongside those policies and our waiver from USDOE and of course the proclamation from Governor Edwards, we are basically at the point to where we will be declaring a static structure in the 1920 school year for accountability purposes, which means that your 18-19 SPS will stay in place for the 1920 school year. So for all purposes, your 2019 SPS is considered your 2020 SPS. And so last week, we began in our newsletter, weekly newsletter, posting a set of frequently asked questions, and they can be linked off of that particular piece of the newsletter to answer any common questions around that particular item or release of 2020 accountability data. We also have recognized that around September 30th of every year, we've been posting new results in the Louisiana School Finder. And due to the idea of this year having static results in it, meaning the same results as before, that particular School Finder will not be updated. We are going to update it though with a banner, and I'm going to share that with you in a moment. But one thing we do want you to recognize that any new data that did come out of 2019-2020 will be loaded to the LDOE data center. And we're actually going to have the banner that will say that if any parent or community member or yourself would pull up the School Finder starting on September 30th, you're going to see that we're going to have this message. It's going to say, due to COVID-19, accountability results were not calculated for the 2019-2020 school year. For available data from the 2019-2020 school year, please visit the LDOE Data Center. So that will be the update to the Louisiana School Finder. And that's the end of my report for the 2019-2020 accountability results. And Dr. Brumley, I'll turn this back over to you.
Thank you. Questions for Mike? In terms of that? All right. So at this time, we have a motion to receive. Would anybody like to amend that motion to endorse the report? Accountability? Mr. Bartlett, motion, Mr. Bartlett?
Second.
Any opposed to that? So now that taking that motion to endorse that, thank you for that information. That was carries. Thank you. We appreciate that. So, moving on. 3.2, consideration of a report regarding student growth calculations for the 2020-2021 school year. Dr. Brumley?
Motion to receive.
That's what I said. Motion to receive. It's all about keeping things moving, right? Dr. Joe Frion, motion to receive. We have a second? Second. Dr. Cook. All right, we have received now, Dr. Brumley. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Watts. On this particular item, Mr. Andrew Shackett, who has been with the department for over 3 years and serves as the Director of Accountability Policy and Analytics, will make this report. So, Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Brumley. Good morning, everybody. I have the privilege of presenting for you today the work that the department has done to date on calculating student growth in this year, which I know is a topic of concern for pretty much everyone. Ms. Noel, if you'd mind passing the clicker. Thank you. So the challenge that we face this year is that we don't have assessments from the 2020 school year for which to base growth. There's no immediate prior score to load into the value-added model, which, as a reminder, is one of 2 steps that comprise the progress index. So the way we measure growth in our current accountability system is through our K-8 and high school progress index, which looks at both the degree to which students are on track to mastery or continued growth if they're already at mastery. And then for those students who don't meet that, we look at how they do compared to their peers on our state's value-added model. So to try to solve for this issue we're in for this 2020-2021 school year, the department has worked on calculating what we've been calling a skip year approach to calculating growth, where rather than using the 2020 assessment as the most recent prior score, we use instead the 2019 assessment as the most recent prior score. It's important to note that the value-added model does not just look at 1 year of assessment data, but it actually looks at up to 3 years of prior data in addition to the current year results that students earn. And so if students have 2018 or 2017 assessment results, those can be loaded into the model as well, as is currently the case in historical years. There is a lot of factors that load into the model beyond just assessment results. So ultimately, when we're producing value-added results for students and figuring out the extent to which they met, exceeded, or did not meet their growth target, we're not just looking at assessment results. We're looking at a host of student characteristics, as you can see in the presentation, such as their disability status, their English learner status, whether or not they're economically disadvantaged, attendance and suspensions, gifted status. We also look at their grade progression. So are they advancing a grade every year, as you would typically expect for a student, or are they being retained in an irregular grade pattern? We also exclude students from the model that do not have comparable comparison groups, because that produces statistically unreliable data. But prior assessment scores are part of the model, and even though we do not have assessment results from last year, we can still include assessment results from prior years in the model, starting with 2019, because the model is already built to use multiple years of prior data in predicting a student's expected score. We then, after building this model, tested the model to see if it can reliably work. And since we don't have assessment results from this current year, we had to work with what we had. So what we did was, we produced a couple of simulated data using prior assessment results from previous school years. So for instance, the most recent year of available data we have is 2019 assessments. So we created a simulation to say, what would the targets look like for students in 2019 if we didn't have 2018 data and instead used 2017 as the most recent prior result? And we built the model and ran it for that year. We also did the same thing for 2018, meaning we took the 2018 year said, what happens when you don't have the 2017 assessment results and instead use 2016, 2015, and 2014 built into the model to predict the student score? Our hypothesis in doing this work is that we will receive a similar result to what was actually the case in that year. And the reason why is because student achievement, while it does vary from year to year, as a state, does not significantly vary. It is not often the case that we see large groups of students statewide going from unsatisfactory all the way to advanced, or going from mastery down to below basic. As a whole, when comparing students statewide, students are pretty consistent in their performance, although we have seen growth year over year in Louisiana. And so even though we don't have the 2020 assessment, because we're still using 2019, 2017, and 2018, I apologize for skipping a year there, 2019, 2018, and 2017, we believe that the result will be similar. And to test that, to actually figure out if it is or not, we took the actual 2019 results and we compared them to the simulated 2019 results using the skip year methodology. And we looked at the degree to which student results correlated between the actual results and the simulated results. And just, a statistical reminder, a positive 1 correlation is perfectly positive, a negative 1 is perfectly negative, there's an inverse relationship, and 0 indicates no correlation. The results of these findings indicate a very positive story. We saw, when comparing the simulated data to the actual data from prior years, very high correlations between what actually happened and what happens when you simulate it using the skip year methodology. Again, a 1.0 would be a perfect correlation, and we don't see a perfect correlation here, and we don't expect to see a perfect correlation here because we do have that missing year of data. The more data you have, obviously, the better you can build a model, the more you can predict. But the data that we have tells us that we can still create a model that produces statistically similar results using the skip year methodology to calculate growth for students. To break down this this chart a little bit more, you'll notice that in the top row it says 17-18 and 18-19. That is because we averaged 2 years of results to test this, because since the growth is happening over 2 years, we compared the 2019 simulated growth to combining their 17-18 growth and their 18-19 growth, which is the growth that occurred over that 2-year span. As Ms. Noel pointed out earlier, and as you all are very acutely aware, school closures in the past spring affected all students, and therefore, it's not something that we can build into the model. The reason why school closure itself cannot be built into the model is because we need to load characteristics that vary significantly by students, and because all schools were closed equally across the state, the model puts students on all equal footing in that regard. There is no indicator we can load in the model for school closure that can meaningfully differentiate student results. Additionally, we don't have a reliable data point on what the type of instruction looked like during that time that we can load into the model with statistical significance, and therefore there is not a data point we can reliably include to capture what was happening in the spring of last year into that value-added model. Obviously, using a different approach means that we'll get different results, and there are a few other considerations as a result. One is that we have 1 less year of assessments, and therefore we have 1 less year of a grade configuration that can be included in the model. So as you can see from this table, we test in the elementary space in grades 3 through 8 annually, as you know. Growth, we calculate in the elementary space for grades 4 through 8. But because we had the skip year approach, because our current 4th graders did not take assessments last year, we don't have a data point with which to include them into our growth model. And so in the K-8 space, our growth model can only incorporate students in grades 5 through 8. In the high school space, it works a little bit differently, and that's because we use the most recent prior score for high school students in producing the value-added model. So for a student in their freshman year, who would traditionally be taking Algebra 1, although we know that's not always the case, we would look for their most recent prior score, whether that be 8th grade math, 7th grade math, or 6th grade math, and that is what gets loaded into the model as part of the prediction for their score. So in the high school space, it's actually already designed to work well with a skip year because we're looking for the most recent prior score over the last 3 years, whatever it is in the model as it exists already. And so for English 2, English 1, Geometry, and Algebra 1, the model is already built to account for the lack of assessment in a prior year. When it comes to using value-added results in teacher accountability, we feel strongly that the results should not be produced for teachers. And the reason being is that, as we all know, students traditionally have a new teacher from one year to the next. And so when you calculate value-added results for teachers using a skip year methodology, there is not a way to reliably predict the degree to which growth can be attributed in the current year to the current teacher or in the prior year from the prior teacher. There's not a way in the model we can separate that out. We don't have enough data to meaningfully do that. And so the impact of this is that for the approximately 25% of teachers statewide for which the value-added model results are incorporated into their evaluations, we would not have value-added results to produce for this school year with which to use in their evaluation. So instead, they would have to use the evaluation formula for teachers who do not traditionally receive value-added results. To close out, again, the way we measure progress and celebrate progress as a state is not just based on the value-added model, it's actually based on 2 questions. Are students on track to mastery? And if not, how are they doing compared to their peers? And so part of that is the first step, our growth to mastery targets. I know that many systems have asked for these targets, and we have been working diligently to produce targets for systems. And on this slide, you can see how we're planning on doing that. Again, since we don't have 2020 data, we can't create a target based on 2020 data. So the most reliable, accurate data point we have to do that is 2019. And so what we're doing is we're taking those 2019 assessments, figuring out still how long that student has to reach mastery, and then taking the amount of points it takes, dividing that by the number of years to the target, as has been the case in policy, and creating new targets based on that. So in this example, you can see a student in 4th grade who earned a scale score of 730. That's not mastery, mastery is at 750. If you assume last year they were in 5th grade and didn't take an assessment, they'd be in 6th grade now. They're taking 3 more assessments until 8th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And they need to grow 20 scale score points to hit 750, that mastery target. So we would take the number of points needed to hit mastery, 20, divide it by the number of years to 8th grade, 3. And when rounded, that gives us 7. We would take that to what their most recent scale score was. And therefore, we would say that student needs to earn a 737 to hit that target and get those points. As a reminder, students who meet that target in step 1 of the progress index get 150 points, the equivalent of an A+, the highest amount of points we can award in accountability. For students who don't meet that target, they would then be considered using step 2, which looks at the value-added model. And as a reminder, their students are percentile ranked, and systems are awarded points based on the ranking of the student, which I believe is a very positive thing because in this climate that we're currently in, where there's very reasonable concern about student achievement dropping this year, the value-added model accounts for that because it's ranking students against each other statewide. So even if every student statewide saw a dip in achievement, we're not looking at the absolute achievement when calculating growth. We're looking at the percentile the student is in relative to their peers.
And I would just like to add to that point that because of what Andrew just described to you, we personally believe the VAM piece will have a larger percentage of students in the VAM structure, step 2, at the end of this year than before. So very happy that he brought that in so that we can recognize that that's a positive structure for the year we're in.
And this concludes my presentation, so Dr. Brumley, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, so just for clarification, Andrew, that was considered kind of a great road there, but you were taking me somewhere where I thought differently. So for this year, teachers, the value-added model will not be calculated in their evaluation, correct?
Can I take that one, Andrew?
First.
Unless you would like Andrew. Okay, so we're not the group that determines whether teacher VAM will happen or not happen. What we're basically reporting to you is that we're the people that calculate VAM, and that we would not have the data needed to calculate teacher VAM this year because of it can't capture the 1 year that the teacher would need to have in order for it to roll up into their VAM. So I need to clarify that the determination doesn't come out of our office, but the formula and the calculations for that do. And we're basically reporting to you that we would not be able to calculate that this year.
Mr. Watts, if I could follow up on that. It could be argued that we could use the 2-year skip model approach for the teacher as well. However, personally, I just don't see that as fair and reasonable to a teacher when that teacher is truly only responsible for one of those 2 years. And it becomes difficult to determine was that teacher responsible for a positive or a negative or a neutral impact on the student. So our department's position is that we would not use BAM for the teacher part of the evaluation for this year.
And I appreciate the work in the skip year and trying to find a way to, to put credibility to that. So I appreciate the work that you did and the information you shared with us. Other questions? Yes, David?
It's just one question. So, the bullet that's on page 15 that says this will impact approximately 25% of the teachers, you're talking about statewide, 25% of the teachers. You're not talking about 25% of the normal bank teachers.
No, we're talking about
Yeah,
25% statewide.
Mr. Alexander, can you get your mic? It's being recorded. So we can hear you.
Yes, yes, Mr. Watts. I got my question answered though. It was just, I was trying to read the 25% in context and I wanted to be sure I read it in the right context. The question was, we're talking about the 25% of the teachers statewide that receive BAM. It's around 25% of our total teachers and they wouldn't get BAM score. Rather than 25% of BAM teachers wouldn't get a score.
Any other questions? Dr. Bromley or?
I do want to clarify this proposal coming to Betsy, right, for the skip year. This is not like the first thing you outlined could be done without Betsy approval.
No,
This is coming to
so
Betsy
the skip year piece would have to have Bessie's approval.
and require policy revision.
Okay.
I just want to make that clear in case you all want to endorse that, so when it does come to the board, they will have that.
Let me clarify, we are reviewing the policy right now and working with Keith's team on just exactly what does need to come up for that. Right, that's correct.
Unlike the first piece.
Clarification on our pre-K-4 schools. I was trying to speak louder. On our pre-K-4 schools, since there's not going to be a growth component, will they simply just have 100% based on test scores, or are you going to give us the growth that they made from the previous year, or a combination of the previous couple, or what do we expect on those pre-K-4 schools since they're not going to have a growth model on their attached this year?
Yes, we certainly understand that that would put pre-K4 schools or K4 schools in a very different position than they normally would be in, where we're celebrating their growth. And so I believe when we would put a bulletin revision before Bessie, we would actually make sure to consider that and make accommodations that make sure that growth can still be celebrated in those schools, because it is not their fault that they've been impacted by this year.
So a couple of scenarios that we were looking at, and we're running some simulations right now, Mr. Kennedy. So there's some policy already in place that we're reviewing that actually may be already there. But secondly is the idea of, do we just take the growth they had and carry it over? Or do we work on letting them share in the district average? That would be one of the years that they would average into their own. So there are a couple of pieces there But we're looking at policy right now and running some simulations, but I've already brought that up as a flag, and it's important for us to really look at that group.
Ms. Noel, I'm happy to hear that y'all are working on that model. We actually have several schools in Rapides Parish that are only house grades that receive no growth age groups. And so my understanding has been that those schools were receiving growth scores for the school that their children feed into.
Yes.
And what it's led to over the last couple of years is principal SLTs, evaluations, and things that are, it's impacting principals whose kids won't test or get a growth score for 2-3 years down the road. So I'm happy to hear that there's.
Well, I think we have, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have about 18 pre-K through 4th grade schools that we need to literally pick them up, run simulations, look at what's happening in those areas, and then we'll be looking for the best solution. And that is going, if we have to do a policy shift, we're going to have to tend to that through Bessie as well. So we do have some wording though that may allow some of the structures already in place, but we're going to take a deep dive into that.
Yeah, and I guess my ask would be that there would be consideration not just for this year, for beyond this year, for pre-K schools or K-3.
Well, I think that's another conversation that'll come to this group later on, is to, lower grade accountability and what does that need to look like. That is not something that'll come up in October for Bessie. That's just something we're working toward before this year is over.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Dr. Good.
When will the report be ready? The student target report?
You're talking about grade targets?
Yeah.
We're gonna put that in our newsletter on next week, and those will be dropped into FTP next week.
What was the question again? Sorry.
I wanted to know when the student target report would be ready for everyone.
She wanted, yes, I'm sorry.
Student growth target report.
Growth to, yes, when will they get their growth to mastery targets? And we're going to be dropping those at the end of next week into the FTP files.
Mr. Watt, just regarding principal SLTs and how that will play in. So there's very specific language around the principal SLT being centered on the SPS and a component. Is there going to be some flexibility offered because of this?
Yes. Unfortunately, that's not in my division, or maybe fortunately it is. I'm not sure of that, but I'm going to share over here with Dr. Brown to see if he wants.
Yeah, Mr. Joe Brown, you're not the first individual who's brought this to our attention, and we are working on what that might need to look like, and as soon as we, get there, we'll pass that out. So, thanks.
I think too, though, it's important for your schools to recognize from our angle of supporting them that their 2018-2019 SPS never went away. It is their final SPS of their progression, and it basically is their placeholder on a progression up to 150. So, they own that, and it never went away. So that's something to consider as well.
And later in the presentation on some additional slides, we'll be covering items regarding evaluation SLTs, and you'll learn more there too.
I had one more and I'll stop.
Okay, that's your limit.
Okay, on the slide you had the characteristics that were included in VAM. Has there been any consideration or any talk this year for those virtual students? We're all struggling with internet connectivity, and I was looking, maybe they get into that student mobility or maybe some of that, but because of our unique situation during this pandemic, we have children that will not come to school. Parents will not allow them. They don't have the connectivity, and we're really struggling to get them the lessons. They're not receiving the live lessons. And then we all have parents that we're asking to be responsible at home and be the adult at home to make kids log on and do and that's not happening, so, well, I'm speaking for myself, we're struggling with some virtual students that definitely will not have as good scores as kids that we're teaching face-to-face. And is there any consideration about including that in some characteristic on that growth model?
Yes. Yeah, we do. Yes. Okay. Okay, so currently, we have some schools in the state of Louisiana that are 100% virtual. And so up until today, there's not been any segregation of that group. They are considered in the same expectation structures for SLTs, and in the BAM model, they've not been separated out. So as I'm speaking about that because this is, I think where you're headed, Mr. Kennedy, is the sense that there's more than one instructional modality going on in your district. For instance, you have face-to-face, you have some kids coming 2 days a week, others, they're on an AD schedule, so we're calling that the hybrid structure. And then you have 100% virtual probably. The concern we have is we do not have a way to capture right now if they started the year out, let's say hybrid, but then October 1, if we were to do some kind of roll-up of student count on October 1, they may actually be face-to-face at that moment, even though they started hybrid. And then you may end up in 2 or 3, 4 months from now, and we have another pandemic hit us in a way that we're back to 100% virtual. So that one child may actually go through all 3 modalities throughout the year. So what we are planning to do is at testing time, there's going to be a place on each individual student's test where the school test coordinator will actually mark whether or not that child spent a certain percentage of time in a virtual setting. We have a way to collect whether it's 100% virtual all year long. We have the ability to collect that. What we don't have the ability to collect is if they spent 50% of their year in a virtual setting, or they spent 25% of their year in a virtual setting. So we need to have a way to pull that information in order to even consider any type of grouping structure for that group of children. What we plan to do is once we do get that labeled well, we plan to run some simulations where we query the 50% group and we take a look at them. And we do very much what we're doing here. We make comparisons to see what's happening in that group versus the regular group. At that point, we can make a decision of whether or not that needs to be separated. We are not in a position today to say that needs to be a subsetting. And I hope I explained that well.
Yes, ma'am. There is some consideration in at least.
Absolutely. I think we want to know that as a state. We want to know whether or not our settings really held up to the same level of expectations as if they had been 100% in your schools. But that's data we want to know. But at the same time, we're going to be watching that and see if that needs to be a comparison group.
Thank you.
I want to take Kennedy's next question. Yeah, thank you.
I can pass it along.
No, I appreciate the question. Anybody else, questions? All right, and so just for clarification, this was really for me, because sometimes I lose sight of this. Our purpose is to make recommendations to Bessie. That's what we're here for. So, and I say that in reference to, would anybody like to amend 3.2 from receiving to endorsing? Anybody? Yes. No, ma'am.
Okay, we're wondering about the fact that students are on full virtual because they're fearful about coming on campus and they will refuse to come and take the test at all.
Okay, I guess, is that a question, or is that just to bring it up as a recognizing? Yes, we recognize, yeah.
That could be a
Yeah.
reality for us.
Yeah. Again, I think that is the type of thing we'll be looking at toward the time of the assessment results, or the time of administration, really, is what percentage of students did not come or show up to test. I will say this, we have, assessment does fall under the division I manage here, but we've been having lots and lots of discussion about remote assessments. That all falls back to a lot of concerns about how do you secure that structure? How do you keep that a secured setting? On top of that, if we don't have a guarantee of security, we absolutely ruin the ability to use any type of structure that came out of that exam in the future. So we have to be very, very careful about talking that we can do remote assessments when I don't think that we are at a point of saying that's even close. So we are encouraging, and again, this is different than ever before, we are encouraging the idea of having a room somewhere on campus that is manned by a group of people, where you can have a schedule of rotations of students in and out of there we do think we're going to be able to manage that on our end, and talking through that with test coordinators. So I just wanted to open up that, it doesn't have to be in the whole group. It could be in a small group structure. It could be on a rotation basis if under the right security structures. So there are some options there. I do want you to know we are continuing the discussion of remote assessment. And I would say that in another month to 6 weeks, I might have a different answer for you on a remote assessment possibility. But as of today, that is not a possibility because of the security structures.
So not to drag this on a little bit, I think it's a valid question. For our diagnostics with our virtual students, we brought them in to agree at times that were comfortable. Not everybody did, but the majority of them, I guess for me to put on the table would be the length of time of a large school to do that by small, the length of time of the testing window would be something just to consider.
Yes,
just to put that in
absolutely.
consideration. You probably thought about it, just if not.
Yeah. And we have restructured assessment windows some this year, mainly to assist you all in your late starts or in your balanced calendar movement. So, yes, that is definitely, it is on our radar, it's being discussed. We're gonna really do a better job of communicating options and so forth. Thank you.
I just have a question or a concern, and I'd like to get a little feedback here from the group. I do have somewhat of a problem, because we are going to have parents who are going to refuse to send their children, if they've chosen the virtual option, refuse to send them to be assessed. Right now, if they're not assessed, they get a 0, and I think that's a concern that we all have. The statement about how we've never, in the past, we've had schools that were totally virtual, K-12 schools, and we've never made any accommodation in the formula. But this is a different kind of a situation. Those schools that were totally virtual, parents chose them, signed off on contracts, had internet connectivity, worked and said they were going to be coaches for their children, and chose that form of instruction outside of this pandemic situation. Whereas many of the parents or the families of those children who have chosen virtual this year, as was said, Mr. Kennedy, they don't have connectivity. We are statewide trying to make those accommodations. And I think some common sense is going to tell us they're not going to score as well. I don't know what the answer to that is. If we're saying that we're going to wait until results come in to kind of see if there's going to be some adjustments, I don't know how that would necessarily fly. The skip year business, I do know that, I find it very difficult each year as we put a new little piece into the accountability formula. It's not a perfect solution. I do see where these growth to mastery targets, we're gonna have fewer kids meeting these. That's obvious from looking at this, because you're missing that whole year of growth, and what you're looking at for this year is to make up for that. It depends on how well and how much kids had last year. So when you're setting these targets to mastery, like if I have an 8th grader, he's got to hit whatever points it was from 2 years ago this year. So those targets, so I can see many fewer kids. So what we're looking at from the growth model, from what I see, basically is just going to be, how did our kids do in relation to other kids throughout the state? And I do know with the storms that have hit this year, in not even just Southwest Louisiana, but all the way through, those districts that have been closed for 18 days or more are not even, I would think, going to be in this. I don't know what the plan is, but if they're not going to get an SPS according to policy because they've been out more than 18 days, if their student scores, if they do take the assessment in the spring, will be considered as part of the relativity in this growth model for students statewide. I mean, there's so many little parts to this. I'm really concerned about how valid we're going to get in the end. So I don't have an answer. I don't envy you guys who are the statisticians up there who are actually working with the psychometricians to see what is valid, what is not. The number of variables in this really concerns me when you get down to the nitty-gritty. And I think it bears a lot more discussion and a lot more understanding of all of us and for a body. That's just the thoughts just from hearing this.
Doris, I agree to the point Kathy made about collecting the data at the end. I do think we want to know what that is, so we know the impact of virtual instruction on kids one way or the other. But you're right, that doesn't help solve an accountability number at the end of the day. So this very topic that was brought up here was also brought up earlier in the week at Accountability Commission about this specific issue. And so it is part of conversation as we're moving forward. So don't think that this is the first time it's been said, but I appreciate this group bringing it up as well.
Yes, just want to add, I know Ms. Voce talked about, when parents have, before the pandemic, parents sign up for virtual school and know what they were getting into. I also want to add to the fact that our teachers are now virtual teachers who never ever signed up to be virtual teachers. And just and no disrespect when I say this, but if we have another pandemic, we are still in a pandemic. I just want to be clear about that. Now, if we're going to have another one, we're still in one. Even though we're in phase 3, we're still in the pandemic. And this is not a year like any other year that we had. And so you heard comments about our parents, we have comments about our teachers, and we just need to recognize here in the state of Louisiana that we have to support our teachers. I understand accountability is something that we have to honor and respect because that's just what we do. We also need to realize the very factors that we're living through right now, and we really cannot put those things to the side. And so again, I think each of us as superintendents, we are applauding our teachers every single day from showing up and doing the things that they need to do to educate our children. But we also need to be honest. Even our brightest teachers, our top teachers, they are also struggling as they're adapting to make sure that our kids are able to get what they need. And when we say what our kids get what they need this year, it's not the same conversation we've had in previous years of making sure that our kids get what they need. Because there's so many other factors that we are working with our students, just their overall health and making sure that we actually can keep them going every day. And I just want us, as we have these conversations about accountability and growing all those things, and again, I support all those things, but I also support the reality of where we are today. And I just wanted to share that information. Thank you.
Dr. Lewis, thank you. I agree. I would also probably say that to clarify, I think probably what Ms. Noel intended to say would be if the situation ended up taking a turn and we had to shift back to a phase 2 or a phase 1 or something below that, not believing that there will be another pandemic or that this one is not over. So, yeah, it's just
Actually, I was referring to it as a stay-at-home order, and it was poor choice of words for me. But the fact that we last spring were in a proclamation to stay at home was really where I was headed. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, and I appreciate that, and I do appreciate that I hear from Dr. Roman's team that you guys at Dell are considering all factors, and I appreciate you keeping that on the table, and we keep that at the forefront as we make this is still a fluid situation, and so we appreciate y'all being mindful of all those concerns that were brought up. That being said, back to the original intent of the motion, would anybody like to amend the motion to receive, change it to endorse? Anybody? So the motion to receive stands. Any opposed to that? Okay, we'll move on to standing item number 4, new business. New business 4.1, consideration of an updated report regarding the reopening of schools in response to COVID-19. Thank you, Andrew, Ms. Noel, thank you. And I'll move on kind of quickly here. So we'll have a motion to receive 4.1.
So moved.
Dr. Coker, second. All right, Dr. Cronin.
thank you. This is, okay, difficult. Okay. So I wanted to share some information with you all. We have been, I am cognizant of when the DOE asks for information, and I know that can be a stressful thing for schools and school systems with limited staff, and certainly even more so now as attention has to be elsewhere. But I just want to share that this particular ask around knowing how many students have a device, a mobile device, knowing how many students can be connected, is an ask so that we can use this information to hopefully help with the solve of internet access across the state. We have BESI members that are very interested in knowing this information so that they can do, or that they can have advocacy efforts within their circles of influence. We have legislators who consistently ask me for this information, and I can't help you help your children if I can't communicate what the current status looks like in our state. So that's why we're the primary reason why we're trying to gather this information. So we do have a learning environment and connectivity tool that provides a tool for every system, charter, and non-public school to easily track student learning environments and connectivity data and identify where additional student connectivity is needed to focus on those advocacy efforts that I've previously mentioned. The learning environment and connectivity tool is available in the school reopening resources section of the Strong Start page. We're asking that because this will update as you put in information, it will update in the dashboard, that you consider updating that frequently because it does populate the dashboard. So Ted, I think you can show an example of that. Give us a moment. So before we go into that, on slide number, let's see, that's page 19. As of September 23rd, the department has received updated information on the total number of devices available for students from 93 systems. So, we have roughly 190 LEAs, so we have information right now from 93 systems. 53 of the systems that have reported are indicating they're one-to-one. So whenever we talk about being one-to-one, in our past life, when we talked about one-to-one, we were thinking desktops. We were thinking about, do we have a device for every kid? But this information is simply, and it is so technical to the point of, is it a device that a student can take with them beyond the wall of the school, and then that device has the ability to connect to Wi-Fi or some form of internet services. So 53% of systems are saying they are one-to-one right now on a mobile device to a kid, 27 being 2-to-1, and 20% being 3 to higher. Now, you might say, well, that's different from what you guys have been saying about 75% have one-to-one. This is based on the systems that have reported to date, based on this new dashboard. And if you look at slide 20, of the 50, and this is of the information we have too. So of the 59 charter and special school systems, 59 geographically bound school systems, and 75 non-public school systems reported information on instructional delivery method, devices, and connectivity as of September 18th. And so we have these charts that as of September 18th, this is the model of instruction that was taking place for the systems that reported. This is the information on what type of device that the school issued. So most of you are issuing Chromebooks, as you can tell from page 20. Then if you look at the next graph, it shows confirmed internet connectivity of those systems that have reported. You have 68% of your students that have confirmed internet connectivity. And then the last chart says internet connectivity assistance. Whenever I first read this graph, I thought to myself, well, surely that can't be accurate, because you would think 8% you would think that the in-home service would be the 92, and then the MiFi's would be the 8. But what this means is in the ways in which you supported a student. So if you actually went out and had to provide that connectivity, this is the way you did that. So if a student was not connected and you had to step in and connect as a system, 8% of the time you did some type of internet home service, but most of the time you were providing some type of MiFi device. So Ted, are we ready to show that? Yeah. Okay. This is difficult. So we have two dashboards that we want to show. I'm going to show DeSoto and Jefferson. And the first one is Jefferson. And so you can see that right now we have 46,721 students that are enrolled. Thank you, Dr. Gray, for allowing us to use Jefferson. You can see and this is to the point earlier that Doris, you mentioned, and others about, some of the students are virtual, some of them are not choosing to be face-to-face. So you can see even in Jefferson, 21,000 are completely virtual, 10,000 are completely hybrid, and 14,000 are in person every day. And it breaks out by grade level for in-person, hybrid, virtual, and then we have information on devices. So you can see in Jefferson alone, their emphasis has been on Chromebooks, with 33,000 available, laptops being 8,000. And it just works on down by grade level. Then it looks at connectivity. And then let's look at DeSoto as well. Mr. Corley is not here, but we did share with him that we would be sharing his data. So this is not a surprise to him. So there's the total enrollment at present. That's their breakdown of where those students are, how they're engaged. It's also interesting, once you look at grade level, you can see that most systems did take the approach of bringing the elementary kids back on site more assertively or aggressively than the high school kids. You can see tablets and connectivity. So as you guys populate that information, or as you guys provide that information, rather, it populates this dashboard. This is going to allow me to have this information for Bessie. It's going to allow us to have this information for the legislature. And as we have conversations about the impact of connectivity and the impact of a lack of devices, which I think is less of an impact than connectivity, at least our policymakers will know where we stand and know the challenges that we're having. So I do ask that if you have not populated or begin to populate your dashboard, that you start to do so. And that would be a real help to me, which would be a help to you. So thank you. Any questions about that?
This is the information. We'll move on with them. Unless there's an opposition to receiving that? Yeah, we do. Moving to 4.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 119, Louisiana School Transportation Specifications and Procedures. This is regarding the bulletin cleanup. Do I have a motion to receive? Powell, motion by Mr. Powell, second. Dr. Brumman?
Thank you. I want to first introduce Dr. Keith Leger. I think at our last meeting, he was not yet here with us, or he was out on that day. So Dr. Leger, many of you know, he is doing he is Assistant Superintendent for Policy and Governmental Affairs, and is really about to get busier with the second extraordinary session of the legislature kicking off. But he is going to provide this report on transportation along with Mike Como, who is the resident expert on yellow machines that run down the highway.
Certainly not the resident. Certainly not the resident expert on transportation. I was hired as the health and physical education coordinator a number of years ago. But transportation is now in my lap, so I'm trying to do the best I can and moving forward on some of the transportation guidelines. Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
He indicated he was a PE teacher. I thought they were experts on buses.
Some of them are, yes. Maybe we can do it off the slide. Yeah. Hopefully you have a copy. In October, we're asking Bessie to consider some revisions to Bulletin 119, the Transportation Bulletin. And we'll ask them to approve revisions around maintaining the policy that's currently in the bulletin, but moving specifications and operational procedures, which are really not policy, to some guidance documents that will be on our website. So really there's some language changes, but the policy requirements remain the same. The specifications and procedures remain the same. It's really about putting things in their proper place. Over the course of the last few years, Bulletin 119 has had policy, specifications, and procedures all wrapped in one. So we're just trying to really get it in the right place. And if you look at those two guidance documents on our website, there are hundreds of pages of specifications and procedures. No stone has been left unturned. So we feel good about having all of these specifications and procedures in the proper place, and they're available to all the transportation supervisors in the systems. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
As I best understand this, over the period of time, not only has policy gone into the policy manual, but also just operational procedures and guidance and things such as that. And so this is something that they've had conversation with the transportation directors about, and just trying to separate those two things. So there's nothing that's really going away. It's just where this information is housed, and just make sure we have policy in a policy section and guidance in a guidance section.
Absolutely.
I do have one question. We raised the issue right around football playoff time last year. I guess what I hear you say, maybe some of this is just guidance, but our risk management inside of the house has some issues with the maximum speed limit of school buses, even on interstate. Is that language changing in there?
No, it's not. It's still 55 miles per hour.
Can we get some reasoning? I mean, we've talked to state police, we've talked to everybody. There's no other law that says that that's a requirement. In fact, when you look at the bulletin, the law that is cited is no longer even a law in the state of Louisiana. And our coaches, our folks are really concerned about the safety of a bus driving 55 miles an hour down a 75 mile an hour speed limit highway.
Yes, I actually inquired with the state police, and there is really not any evidence that shows that a bus driving at 55 miles per hour is at any more danger, or that there have been any more accidents. And at the national level, the recommendation is 55 miles per hour. If that's the other legislature wants to consider that, I think they could. But I don't think there's any evidence that shows that it's unsafe to be at 55 on this interstate with a bus.
Is there any evidence to say that it's not safe to raise it?
No.
This can be my recommendation that there be some consideration for changing that.
You want to make a motion?
would you like to make that motion now and give a recommendation?
I would, yes.
So we have a recommendation. In a second. To receive that recommendation?
So can you restate what you would like the recommendation to be to ask Bessie to consider?
That the language that recommends or the guidance that school buses cannot be driven over 55 miles per hour on the interstates be taken out or changed to
What would we like it to
raise
be?
that speed limit.
What would you like it to be? What's the recommendation? 60, 65?
I'll let some professionals say.
Just whatever the speed limit is.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be the stated speed limit. I would think that's why stated speed limits are in place. That there's,
Just stated the speed limit.
I mean, in Texas, 18-wheelers have to drive, I think, 5 miles per hour slower than the rest of the traffic or something, but it needs to be at least a stated speed limit.
75.
Sure. Somebody want to make a different recommendation?
Yeah.
I just want it to be, so that it doesn't take us 8 hours to drive, we have to drive to the other end of the state.
I understand the 55, but I almost think let's put a number on it.
No, I mean, to me, the safest thing is just do the stated speed limit. No long power.
So your recommendation is to make the change to the language to say that
Consistent.
they can be consistent with the stated speed limit. So that's the recommendation. Do you still want to?
The state speed limit?
The state, do you still want to second that?
Now, technically, I don't know if any of our buses will actually go that fast, but.
I'd rather leave it on what the state speed for the larger vehicles. So I will recommend, I'll second if you'll amend that motion and say.
I go with it.
No, I'll second. I don't want to go on record and say I want buses driving 75 miles
Okay,
an hour.
you go ahead.
I will go on record and say I support Jeff's motion at a safe speed for larger vehicles on the interstate.
As determined by
State law?
state law. So the state law, the stated speed limit.
That's all I got to say. I've stated mine.
Is there a state law for larger vehicles to buy other than what this, I mean, is there a law, is there specified?
For larger vehicles, I can't speak to commercial vehicle speed limits.
Usually it's more than 5 to 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's gonna be truck speed limit
Yeah.
versus, I mean, so we could do something maybe. Because I mean, I live in a sugarcane world, and I don't want them driving, the same as those folks. It's my concern.
Well, I think most of our state highways, the speed limit is 55, with some exceptions where it goes up to 65. I think the biggest concern is in.
Yeah, right. And my concern again goes back to them driving 75 on the interstate. That's my concern.
But that was not the motion.
Yes, it was.
That's not the motion I second. He said that's the speed for a larger vehicle, not 75, right?
Yeah, right. The expert says
18
we don't know of any
wheels,
difference in
75.
the speed limits.
Yes, not always specified.
Yeah.
You know, some cases it will indicate the trucks, like on west.
So say stated speed limits except on the interstate maximum 65.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay. And there's some clarification there. I see what you're saying. I got it. So those other highways that are 60, they're still only going 55. Okay. So the stated speed limit?
No, on the regular highways, it's the stated speed limit.
No, I get that. That's the,
Okay.
that's the change.
But on the interstate.
Then on the interstate, it'll be a maximum of 65 miles per hour. So that
I will
is the
second
new,
that.
so everybody clear on the new recommendation?
I'm just trying to help you.
Yeah, I appreciate
You're making it hard.
So it's the stated speed.
Some of y'all must not have to drive as far as we did last year.
So buses are able to travel at the stated speed limit, with the exception on the interstate, with the maximum speed of 65 miles per hour. That is the recommendation. They made it, seconded.
May I answer a question, Mr. Watts? Is the recommendation to receive the report with some form of an amendment to recommend a change in policy? I'm just curious what we're doing.
We have a motion to receive, but he made a separate motion in addition to that to make.
Receive with this recommendation.
Yes, receive and now I just want to clarify, is this in guidance or policy?
It's in policy, it's in the bulletin, right, as we speak, 55 is the maximum.
Okay. So the motion would now become receive and
recommend?
Yeah, all we can do is make a recommendation.
To clarify, I didn't mean what we were doing, I meant what Mr. Powell is doing.
That's a tough question. I'm not sure we have enough time to answer that.
Yeah, so at this time, it sounds like the motion is to receive the original policy with the recommendation of the change in speed limit for buses. Does that sound right? And we have a motion, we have a second. Comment? Any opposed to this? Anybody opposed? Anyone?
Just for the Bessie board members that are here, James will be glad to come speak at the Bessie meeting regardless.
Okay. So that we do have one.
Let's try to get a variance for this year.
All right? Okay. Good? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good morning. Before I proceed, I want to let you know that I had the opportunity.
Calculate that, hold on 1 second. Oh, give me 1 second to get to that point. I'm still trying to get Jeff cleared up here. All right, 4.3, moving on to 4.3. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 130, regulations for evaluator and assessment of school personnel regarding teacher observations for the 2020-2021 school year. Do I have a motion to receive? Motion by Mr. Alexander, second by Mr. Vivian. Dr. Lazare.
Thank you, sir. Had the opportunity to listen in on the reopening roundtables, and I must say that what I heard on there was very inspirational. Your innovation, your grit, your can-do, I hate using the word attitude, that can-do, just that grittiness came across very clear in that phone call, and you know, the impact that you all are having on your students is greatly appreciated and acknowledged. So, in listening to stakeholder concerns and taking into consideration the complexity of this school year, one of the issues that we're going to be bringing to Bessie deals with observations. Right now, in policy, if a teacher is rated highly effective in the previous year, then they are only required to have one observation in the following year. However, since we didn't have ratings this past school year, we felt that revision was necessary. And so what we're going to bring to Bessie and propose is to decrease the number of observations, classroom observations, from 2 to 1 for this school year only, and for only those teachers who have earned a rating of highly effective or effective proficient on their first observation. So therefore, those teachers who do not earn a rating in those first 2 tiers would then be afforded or required second observation for the school year. As a former school administrator, I appreciate the limited and the finite time that school administrators have during the school day. And as you all know, observations, when you take into consideration the pre-op conference, the observation itself, and then preparing for that post-observation conference, that process can take anywhere from maybe 5 to 10 hours. And so the thinking here is that, again, with the complexities of this school year, and in some cases 20, 25, 30-year veteran teachers, all of a sudden feeling like novices as we move into a digital format, that this would afford school administrators more time to work with struggling teachers in dealing with that shift towards a digital format. So that's one of the issues, topics that we'll bring to Bessie. The other deals with student learning targets for administrators, because as Kathy mentioned earlier, we do not have school performance scores from the spring of 20 Therefore, the revision asked here is to shift student learning targets for administrators to, instead of being based on school performance scores, to be based on formative assessment data is an option. However, we also are including the option of basing it on the school performance score. So the proposal we're bringing to Bessie is to shift from required student learning targets to be solely based on school performance scores to having the option of basing it on a school performance score or an internal formative assessment.
Thank you, Dr. Leger. Questions? Right. Example of an internal formative assessment? From your guys' standpoint, is that, not trying to put you on the spot, it's just.
So this is similar to, there we go. This is similar to the guidance that we've already provided for teachers. So in other words, we are allowing principals, our school leaders, to set SLTs similarly to how we're guiding teachers to set them. So based on LEAP 360 diagnostics, based on that first unit of instruction and the assessments embedded within those units.
Thank you. Since no questions, then would there be a motion to receive or an amendment to endorse this?
Mr. Watts, if I may add on to Dr. Leger's comment, I believe that the observation process is certainly a way to improve instruction, especially if it's done correctly. If you do have those conversations in advance of the observation around what that teacher is trying to accomplish, if you do spend the adequate amount of time in there during that lesson, and then if you do come out of that session and provide really sound feedback and opportunities for the teacher to improve, that's a really effective process. You know, even if we just look at research, we know that feedback in itself is one of the most powerful ways to improve outcomes. And so that process, if done correctly, it takes a lot of time, and we know that. And right now, we also know that you're pulled in so many different directions. Your principals are pulled in so many different directions. And so we know that some teachers are struggling more than others. And I think that level of struggle isn't dependent on some of the things that might have been a reason why someone struggled in the past, because this is a completely new year for everyone. So our belief in doing this is just giving leaders the opportunity to spend more time with those teachers that might need that support and encouragement and help the most. But the other side of that, and the reason I wanted to grab the mic, is just because I think that we have an opportunity here to recognize teachers that are doing a great job every single day and that are really effective in the work that they're doing, and having an opportunity to reward them in some way if they feel this is a reward for the work that they are doing. So that it really has two sides to it, and I just wanted to make sure to point that out around the reward potentially that someone may perceive from being effective.
Thank you, Dr. Combs.
I'll make the motion that we endorse.
You make a motion to endorse by Dr. Joe Frion, we have a second by Ms. Levin. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Slide 26 there, I know it's not on our agenda, so I don't know if there's something, Dr. Brumley, that.
Yeah, so slide 26 is actually part of just us offering what we are doing as a department to support teacher and leader evaluation. So it's a tag on to Bulletin 130 changes. So just wanted to let you all know, I know leaders in schools who are actually conducting teacher observations, teachers themselves have some questions about how they'll be evaluated in these different modalities of learning, these different formats. And so this is just a list of things that we are doing as a department in the next few months. First of all, we're offering greater reliability training, which we always do for recertification and for new Compass evaluators. But wanted to let you all know that we have taken the time to update these materials and refresh them so that they now take into account a blended learning format, and those will be available in our Compass library on October 9th. And so we really encourage everyone. It is per policy that all Compass evaluators do this self-paced modules prior to conducting any formal observations. So we really encourage everyone to utilize those. That will be available in the next 2 weeks. And secondly, just wanted to take a few minutes to announce some other training that we'll be offering as a department. First of all, knowing that we have about 95% of our systems self-reporting as users of Google Classroom, we will be offering some Google Classroom training. This will be open for teachers and leaders beginning mid-October and throughout the month of October, on 3 different topics within Google Classroom, but really learning how to leverage virtual learning environments within Google Classroom, just acknowledging, we've partnered directly with Google to do these trainings, in acknowledgement that most of our state is using Google Classroom at this time. And secondly, wanted to announce that we are also partnering with NIET to offer both synchronous and asynchronous training for utilizing best practices in virtual instruction and virtual coaching protocols, knowing that some of the observations, feedback, formal evaluations for this year will be on teachers who are completely virtual, making sure that our leaders and teachers are best prepared for that. And so those will begin next month as well. We'll have synchronous options for 3 different tracks: K-2 teachers, 3-12 teachers, and leaders. So that leaders track will be open to anyone who conducts formal evaluations. And we'll also have an asynchronous option. And so that will include a facilitator guide. So if you all have PLCs or cluster meetings, time that your teachers come together, the asynchronous materials will be available for your teachers to do either in a virtual collaborative setting or face-to-face at their planning period time, for them to walk through the asynchronous module together in these best practices in virtual instruction. So those are the things that we'll be offering over the next month or so.
Thank you. So just information on this, so Dr. Bowman, anything as we close?
Yeah, I want to just share that Dr. Chasson and her team held a webinar yesterday, and I think it was really well received by individuals from your teams who participated in that. And I just want to give her an opportunity to talk. I know we talked about it in the reopening roundtable, but just briefly about the plans for the Chief Academic Officer roundtable that you're beginning in October.
Yeah, absolutely, thanks. So you all should have received, if not, please shoot me an email after this. You should have received an email from me earlier in the week asking you to nominate up to 2 individuals. Whoever in your system is leading curriculum and instruction, assessment, professional development, whatever you call them in your system, they are welcome to attend our Teaching and Learning Roundtable session. The first one is October 16th. They will take place monthly, the 3rd Friday of every month. I'll be hosting them. I'll have members of my team on. We'll be spotlighting and showcasing some best practices from around the state, and just on a variety of really timely and relevant topics. It'll be, I think, a great time for CAOs and people in those types of positions to collaborate. It is an invitation-only session. It's not an open webinar, just because we're trying to keep just a conducive virtual environment for collaboration, time for questions and conversations as well. So if you didn't receive that email, feel free to reach out to me, and we'll get you that nomination form.
Good? That's good, all right. So at that point, the best motion of the day, motion to adjourn? Anyone? Nobody wants to adjourn? Well, motion by Dr. Lewis, and seconded by the opposed? We were now adjourned. Thanks, everybody.